I'm a person who is known by my friends for having confrontational opinions, differing opinions to people. I think I've got an opinion for you that I think we all share, and that is that Disney makes some pretty good movies, don't they? I think we can all agree on that in 2026, but they also have made some shockingly terrible movies. One of the movies that I remember watching as a kid in the 90s was this movie, Blank Check. I don't know whether anyone else has ever seen it. It's rubbish. And basically, this kid gets knocked over by a rich businessman in his car, and he tries to make it right, and so he pulls out his checkbook and he signs it, and he's saying to the kid, what figure do you want? What do you want? How much do you want? How much do you want? And then something else happens that distracts the businessman, and he hands this kid a blank check. And then the film is this kid spending all this businessman's money, and then it doesn't work out, and then it all does work out, and it's all fine. It's a rubbish movie. But I think we all like the thought of having a blank check. And I think in this series that we've been looking at, Then God, I think it's easy to feel like it's a bit of a blank check. That maybe you're coming today as a Christian or not a Christian, and you hear Then God, and we're talking about this, and we think, oh, actually, it's like a blank check moment that I can say, then God gave me the winning lottery numbers. Or then God made England win the World Cup. I mean, God's omnipotent in that, but he's not that good. Or maybe you might say, then God showed me that he was real. Or then God took the pain away. Or then God made that person come back into my life. But the reality is, none of us, not many of us, would get the story that we would write for ourselves. We don't get the blank check, then God moment. But today, we're going to open up some of that of what we do while we're waiting for the then God moment. And we're going to look at the greatest then God moment in the history of time. And that is when Jesus rose from the dead. We've just been singing about it there. And the writer of Acts puts it like this. They took him down from the cross and buried him. And then God raised him from death. And many of us are waiting for this then God intervention moment because we know that we don't get the story that we would write for ourselves. Very few of us get the story that we would want, but all of us get a story. And one day, the very season that you are in right now, the very moment that we're in, we will get to tell a story of what this moment was like. And I think history is kind to those who get to tell the story. And the story of the cross and resurrection is recorded in lots of different ways, and one of which is recorded by John, who was one of the disciples. And we're going to pick up in the book of John around the cross and the resurrection. But John gives us some details, and I've mentioned this before, but he gives us some details in this then God moment, in this moment of world history. He gives us some details that I don't think are that necessary. And it comes up in John 20, and he says, so basically Mary Magdalene has discovered the empty tomb, and she goes and tells some of the disciples. And so she came running to Simon Peter, and this is John, but John wouldn't name himself in his version of events. He decided to call himself the other disciple, the one Jesus loved. I'm his favourite. And said, they have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him. So Peter and the other disciple, his favourite one, started for the tomb. Both were running, but the other disciple, Jesus' favourite one, outran Peter and reached the tomb first. John thinks that in the greatest moment, the then God moment in history, that he thinks it's important that we should know that John's faster than Peter. He should know. Just so you all know, I won the race. I got there first. My Strava time was quicker than his. And he won't let us forget it, because a couple of verses later, it says, finally, the other disciple who had reached the tomb first also went inside. I cannot read this story without laughing, going, if I was John, I'd definitely be putting that in as well. I'd be putting the Liverpool scores and everything in there. It's crazy, isn't it? And we all get a story to tell one day, and John just so happens to get to tell his own version of events. But we're going to look at this story from Mary Magdalene's point of view that also does appear in John's account. And we're going to fast forward a little bit, and it says, "So now Mary stood outside the tomb crying. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb and saw two angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. They asked her, 'Woman, why are you crying?' 'They've taken my Lord away,' she said, 'and I don't know where they have put him.' At this, she turned round and saw Jesus standing there. But she did not realize that it was Jesus. He asked her, 'Woman, why are you crying? Who is it that you are looking for?' Thinking he was the gardener, she said, 'Sir, if you've carried him away, tell me where you've put him and I will go and get him.' Jesus said to her, 'Mary.' She turned towards him and cried out in Aramaic, 'Rabboni,' which means teacher." She recognized his voice. You see, Mary got this brilliant story that she's able to tell, that she was on the front row for the resurrection moment on Easter Sunday. But it wasn't just that she was there and it happened around her. It happened to her. It was a personal, intimate moment. And we're going to use this to open up what we can do when we're waiting for that then God moment, because we don't get to hear a lot of what happened between Friday and Sunday. Jesus died on the Friday and rises again on the Sunday. We don't know a lot of what happened on Saturday. It's pretty silent about Saturday. And so we don't get to know what all the disciples did or didn't do and all of the people that it happened. We kind of have this moment of hurt and pain and then the then God moment. And actually, I think, not just in this moment, but in lots of areas of life, we don't get to hear how people have recovered. We hear that something happened and then they are now better or they've kind of recovered from it. And I don't know if you heard Martin Lewis, he got an award at the BAFTAs, a special award recently, and he said this in his speech, and I want you to have a look and a listen to it because it's really interesting.
"Now, as this award was pre-announced, I wrote this on Thursday. Hold yourself together. 42 years to the day since we suddenly lost my mum just before I was 12. My childhood was over. For 6 years, barring school, I barely left the house. And now I'm picking up a BAFTA. So to all those of you out there struggling with your own demons, know this: life can be transformed. It can get better. And if you told that broken, scared boy that I'd proudly be a campaigning journalist, his jaw would have dropped. So I dedicate this to consumer journalism, where I found my fire. It's not seen as sexy, sadly. But in recent years, it's helped people navigate pandemic support, push governments to backtrack on energy hikes, legislate against scam ads, though far more is needed on that.
Get better. But what do we do while it's not? What do we do while it's not better? Martin Lewis talks about 42 years since his mum passed away. Well, what did he do? We don't know. We don't get to hear a lot of those stories of what you do in the in-between, because waiting can be hard. And you see, you might say, well, it's not a then God story yet, but maybe currently it's a when God's story. And what I want to do is look at what we can do in the waiting. And one of the things that I've been thinking about through this series is I think then God is often preceded by but I. See, this thing happened, but I did X, then God. And I want to suggest that there's 5 things that we can pull out of Mary Magdalene's story that are but I's that we can apply. And the first thing is, but I will be honest. See, Mary was honest with her emotions, and I want you to know that you don't need to put on a show. You don't need to come here and pretend that everything is okay. God is not scared of your emotions and your feelings. He gave you them. God's not scared of your questions and your anger. In fact, there's a whole book in the Bible called Lamentations, written by a guy called Jeremiah, who's just pouring out his hurt and pain and his frustration at God. And he says this, he says, pour out your heart like water in the presence of the Lord. God wants us to be honest with him in the middle space, be honest with God. Mary starts with crying. She even tells Jesus himself, even though she doesn't realize it's Jesus yet. She tells him what's going on. She tells him why she is crying. And a little bit later on at the end of our time together, we're going to sing a song called I Trust in God. And the bridge to that says, I sought the Lord and he heard and he answered. And I've got to be honest with you. I've stood right down here during that bridge and I've wrestled with God. And I've said to God, well, you might have looked at me and thought, isn't Andy such a great holy person and a pastor and all this incredible stuff? And I'm stood there going, God, I can't sing this today because I feel like I have sought the Lord and you've heard me, but you've not answered me. And I've stood down there and I've felt that. And maybe you have as well. And God's not scared of us being honest with him. God's not scared of us saying, God, I'm struggling with this. I'm struggling to understand this. For us, authenticity is a core value here at Lifecentral Church. And we want you, we're not putting pressure on you to say yes to Jesus too soon. We're going to provide opportunities. We don't want you to come and pretend to be something that you're not. The reason why we do that is we think that's a reflection of the God that we're trying to introduce you to. And so the first but I that you can do is, but I will be honest while I'm waiting. The second thing is, but I will show up and I will stay. Jesus was buried quickly on the Friday before sunset. Part of why we don't know a lot of what happened on Saturday is it was the Sabbath day. And that started at sunset on the Friday and would run all the way through sunset on the Saturday. There wasn't much that they could have done in those moments. And so he'd have been buried quickly on the Friday, and then as soon as the sun set on the Saturday, Mary would have got out about, got the spices, got the stuff to treat the body. She was going to do what she would do in those moments and make sure that the body was treated and cared for and looked after properly, as there was the custom in those days. And so she'd have stayed up late, and then it tells us that very early before sunrise on the Sunday, she was up. She didn't have much sleep, is what we can put together for it. You see, Mary doesn't have answers. She doesn't have solutions. I don't think she's even coming to the tomb with any expectation, because she comes expecting to see a dead body. But she shows up. In the midst of her grief, in the midst of her hurt and pain and questions and confusion, she shows up. And I think in the silence of Saturday, while we're waiting, it's easy to give up in the middle of the story. It's easy to give up and think, God's forgotten me. See week 1 for information on that one. It's easy to lose perspective and think, I can't see God in this situation anymore. See, even the disciples, they ran away confused because they see the empty tomb. And John tells us that they still did not understand from Scripture that Jesus had to rise from the dead. Then the disciples went back to where they were staying. See, the miracle is that Jesus rose from the dead and appears. But what's extra special here is that Mary stayed and got to witness it. And I want to say, maybe you might come to church today and say, I didn't like it that much. Or you go to Alpha and maybe your story is, I didn't really like night 1 of Alpha, but I came back and I showed up, and then God. Maybe you would say, I was really hurt and really hurt by the way I felt like I was treated at church, but I kept consistent. I stayed, I showed up, I worked through it, and then God. Or maybe on the flip side of it, you might say, we made a decision as a family that we were going to prioritize Sunday and being at church. And we made the decision that we were going to show up and we were going to stay and we were going to stick at it, and it was inconvenient. And when it was a nice day, it was annoying that we came to church, and we made that decision. But over the course of 10 years, then God did something. See, I want to say, don't quit in the middle of your story. Don't make permanent decisions based in temporary pain. Be there to outlast the crisis. Be there at the end to see the then God moment. The third but I is, but I will trust. How did all of the disciples have this front row seat to who Jesus was for 3 years? Get to know him, hear all the things that are literally written down that Jesus said, the hints that he gave about dying and rising again. How did nobody go, he might come back, you know? He's that kind of guy that would die and rise again. Like, how did none of them trust that Jesus was who he said he was in those moments? I think because they probably trusted their own emotions and what they could see and touch and feel in front of them more than what Jesus had said. You see, they didn't have an information problem, they had a memory problem. And I think we're good at trusting ourselves. We're good at trusting our own instincts, our own feelings. We trust what we see in front of us really well. And I have mentioned this podcast before a few times. Not every episode is brilliant, but Diary of a CEO with Stephen Bartlett, he's recently sat down with John Lennox, another theologian who's opened up it's an incredible conversation again. And Stephen Bartlett, I think, is really asking some great questions. But they wrestle over this theological point. And Stephen Bartlett's like, but I need evidence, I need this, I need this, I need this. And John Lennox says, we could go back and forth all day long, and I could tell you that there's a red Ferrari parked out on the street for you. And we could go back and forth and discuss it, and I could tell you all of the evidence and my experience of it. He said, but at some point, you've got to trust what I say enough to get up out of your seat, walk across the room and look out the window and see and experience the red Ferrari for yourself. And maybe you've got loads of questions about God and church and faith, and you're desperate to see the evidence. You're like, then God turned up in my bedroom and said, hello, I'm real. Like, maybe that's what you're looking for. And God's saying, get up and walk across the room and trust and experience it for yourself. I'm into space a lot, and I love the recent Apollo mission. And I picked up this from a documentary that NASA have a saying, and it's this: in God we trust, everyone else brings data. And it's this sense of they are going to maths their way out of a problem. They are going to science their way to space and back. And if there's something that we can't figure out and we can't have under our control and in our equations, then we're going to trust God. But only then will we trust God. We're going to work it all out for ourselves, and then the things that we can't work out, we're going to trust in God. And I think as a Christian, sometimes I act like that. That I go, do you know what? I'm pretty clever. I can work this out. I can sort all the things that are under my control, and anything that's outside of my control that I can't have under my dominion, then I'm going to have to go, God, I trust you. But am I willing to trust God with the things that I can see and feel, the things that I know? Am I willing to come to a point where I can say this, that God, I trust you more than I trust myself? Because I trust myself a lot. But I'm challenging myself, and God's challenging me and saying, do you trust me more than you trust yourself, your own instinct, your own thoughts and feelings? Sometimes it doesn't make sense, but God is in control. That's what the disciples miss in this moment. Maybe you'll never get to know that God is trustworthy until you put your trust in him. Maybe the question today that you're asking is, can I trust you, God? I think the only way to know is to try trusting him. The fourth, but I, in the middle while we're waiting, is but I can be patient, or I can show patience. I think for most of us, God's not moving quick enough. We're desperate for God to go sooner. We overestimate what God will do in the short term, and we underestimate what God is doing in the long term. I think God often works in little increments. It's like moments and margins. And I love the margins. Part of what I do here is I think about the margins, the little things that will make a big difference. And I'm inspired by the British cycling team. The British cycling team in the build-up to the 2012 Olympics, they obsessed about the margins. And they looked at, well, how can we tweak the brakes? And tweaking the brakes gave them 0.001 of an advantage. And then they were like, right, how can we tweak the handlebars? And how can we tweak the tires? And how can we tweak the chassis and the frame of the bike? How can we tweak the helmets and what they're wearing? How can we tweak the shower gel that they wash in? Like, all of this stuff, they thought about every single margin, and each one of them gave them 0.001 of a second. But their obsession, the aggregation of small margins, they called it, came together, and it meant that they're 3 or 4 seconds faster than the competition. And I think sometimes we can miss what God is doing in the moments, in the margins. God's moving incrementally, bit by bit, makes these small adjustments, and have patience, guys. Because here's the thing, if it's not good yet, then God's not done yet. Paul is writing to a bunch of people in Rome, Christians, and he says, and we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Now, I know the difficulty of me putting this verse up if you're in the middle and you're waiting for a then God moment. I know that this verse is often misinterpreted as God does everything for a reason, is often what's said off the back of this. And that's not what Paul is saying, and that's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is in the midst of your hurt and pain, God can bring good out of the worst of times. We just have to be patient. And maybe you're not ready to hear that yet, and that's okay. Maybe you're thinking, shut up, Andy, I'm not ready to process that. That's okay. You know, the day it's good might not be this side of eternity. But Friday wasn't good. Saturday wasn't good. Mary crying at the tomb wasn't good. But the resurrection happened while everybody else was still grieving. Nobody's faith caused the resurrection. Nobody prayed hard enough for Jesus to be risen from the dead. God was already at work while everybody else was confused. You see, if it's not good yet, God's not done yet. Be patient. And the fifth and last but I will listen and watch. Mary's there and she's looking for a body. She's looking for what she thinks should be there. And then Jesus said to her, Mary. And she listens to the voice of Jesus. And John telling us this is reflecting back to a couple of chapters earlier where Jesus talked about being a good shepherd. And he said his sheep follow him because they know his voice. But Mary nearly missed it. She nearly missed the risen Jesus because she went expecting to see a body, and that was what she was looking for. She wasn't expecting Jesus to be risen from the dead, and she nearly missed this then God moment. And I think sometimes we can nearly miss God at work because we're looking for what we think should happen. In the book The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the scene is set that Narnia's been under the control of the White Witch for many years, for a long, long time. It feels like winter will never end. The people have been under oppression and fear. Most people can't see that anything is changing. And then these children show up in the story and they're looked after by Mr. and Mrs. Beaver. And a little bit happens and then Mr. Beaver utters one of the most famous lines from these books, and he says to the children, Aslan is on the move. And the significant thing in the story is that Aslan hasn't appeared yet. The battle hasn't been fought and won. The witch hasn't yet been defeated. But Mr. Beaver is looking around and saying, Aslan is on the move because the snow is beginning to melt. Spring is on the way. People are starting to whisper that hope is rising. Can we look around and see that hope is rising, that Aslan is on the move? Because it's easy to miss it. When we're waiting for the then God moment, it's easy to miss what God's doing. Twice a week, we as a staff team, we gather together and for different meetings, but as part of those 2 meetings, we start by sharing good news stories. Stories of God at work. Stories where God is moving in your lives, in your friends' lives, and we share the big stories and the little stories. The little stories of I invited this person and they came, and the big stories of this person's life has been totally transformed. And we do it to remind ourselves that Aslan is on the move. It reminds me that it's not about the emails, it's not about the leaks in the roof, it's not about the rotas, it's not about the social media schedules, it's not about getting everything done, it's about helping people find and follow Jesus. I want to listen and watch. I don't want to be hyper fixated on what I think should happen. I want to see what God is doing. And these 5 but I things might need to be actioned for a long time. It might be for a month, it might be for a year, it could be for a decade. Saturday can be a long day. But if it's not good yet, God's not done yet. And so what will be your but I in the middle of your story? Are you going to be honest with God? Are you going to show up? Are you going to stick around? Are you going to trust Him? Are you going to wait patiently? Are you going to listen and look for Him in the margins? Because one day you'll get to tell a story that says, this happened, but I, then God. Mary Magdalene, she might tell the story of the resurrection, that then God raised Jesus from the dead. But I'm not sure she'd say that. I think Mary might say something like, when Jesus died, I thought everything I believed in was lost, but I chose to stick around. I chose to stay. I chose to show up. I chose to be honest. I thought it was all lost. I thought God had gone. But then God showed me He was closer than I ever thought He could be. I'd love to invite you to stand. And I want to pray, and then we're going to sing that song, I Trust in God. And maybe you feel like you're in the middle right now. My prayer is that as we sing, that you would know God to be closer than you ever thought He could be. And so God, we invite you now to come and meet with us. Would you speak to us? Would you help us to action what we need to action? But God, I pray that we would know your voice whispering into our ear, whispering our names. God, I thank you that you're not just a story to be told, you're a Savior to be known. And as we sing about trusting in you in the middle, I pray that you might shift something in us. We pray in your mighty name. Amen.